When a sleek, high-speed data pipeline suddenly freezes in place, the immediate instinct is to look for a technical fault. But in modern IT environments, operational bottlenecks are rarely caused by server limits or poorly optimized software. The hardware usually performs exactly as expected. Instead, these sudden, catastrophic halts are almost always failures within the human stack. The visible red flags of these system crashes appear as high employee absenteeism, long project deadlines, and a sudden spike in persistent work mistakes. The trap management often falls into is reacting to these surface-level issues with emotional frustration or punitive measures. The primary principle of problem diagnosis at work requires a strict separation between a symptom and a root cause. Those missed deadlines and daily mistakes are symptoms of a deeper structural error. To systematically isolate these root causes, we have to apply established organizational behavior frameworks. Diagnosing human dysfunction requires the exact same structural rigor and systems thinking that an engineer applies when debugging a complex block of code. We start debugging at the micro level of the organization, looking directly at the individual engineer's motivation. Victor Vroom's expectancy theory shows motivation is a multiplicative equation. Expectancy times instrumentality times valence. Expectancy that effort leads to performance is assigned a 1. Instrumentality that performance is rewarded is another 1. If the reward lacks value, valence is 0. Failing one variable causes motivation to collapse. Management consistently fails to accurately gauge valence because they operate with severe interpersonal blind spots. They assume they know what their team values. To map this relationship awareness, organizations utilize the Johari window model. Applying this model systematically shrinks an individual's blind spot and hidden area. This builds the psychological safety necessary for employees to honestly communicate what truly motivates them. Motivation is not generated by raw enthusiasm. It is a highly sensitive system that requires psychologically safe input data from the employee to function properly. Zooming out, the next diagnostic layer is the dyadic relationship between the manager and the employee. The Hersey-Blanchard model plots task against relationship behavior into 4 quadrants. A low readiness team at R1 requires a directive, telling style. Over time, the team develops autonomy toward high readiness at R4. Structural failure occurs if the manager refuses to alter their leadership style. Maintaining a rigid, transactional style on a high-readiness team suppresses their hard-earned autonomy. This mismatch directly causes behavioral dysfunction. Leaders are eventually forced to address this resulting dysfunction, particularly those persistent work mistakes during Verherman's appraisal interviews. If a manager relies on the traditional tell and sell method during these reviews, they fail to resolve the issue, because that method leaves no room for discovering underlying friction. The problem-solving approach is far more effective here. It allows both parties to collaboratively isolate the gap between employee capability and the manager's rigid oversight. Effective technical leadership is never a static identity. It is a dynamic, chronological variable that must scale perfectly with team maturity. Expanding the scope even further, we have to view the entire team as a collective entity that progresses through cyclical evolutionary stages. This timeline displays the 4 stages of group development. A team moves sequentially through forming, storming, norming, and performing. The storming phase is highly volatile. Conflict peaks as team members actively contest roles and project direction. To survive this phase, a leader must apply John Adair's action-centered leadership model, carefully distributing their responsibilities across achieving the task, building the team, and developing the individual. If they succeed, the group reaches the performing stage. However, this peak output is a fragile equilibrium. Mismatched leadership or shifting project parameters can force a high-performing group to regress back into the conflict of the storming phase. When this collapse happens, organizational culture serves as the vital, overarching, boundary-defining mechanism that dictates exactly how the team handles the resulting stress. Deal and Kennedy's cultural framework categorizes these company environments based on their inherent risk tolerance and the speed of their feedback loops. The operational norms of a high-speed, work-hard, play-hard culture process failure very differently than a high-risk, slow-feedback, bet-your-company culture. Recurring team regression often stems from misaligned macrocultural boundaries that dictate how individuals resolve conflict and process feedback. By working backward through the system, we can trace the exact diagnostic steps needed to isolate a department-wide operational failure. This complete diagram shows how micro-motivations, like Vroom's equation, nest inside the Hersey-Blanchard leadership matrix, which maps onto the team's developmental timeline, with everything encased within the structural pillars of corporate culture. Accurate organizational diagnosis requires completely separating the visible symptom on the surface from the invisible structural cause buried deep in the process. Established organizational behavior frameworks remove the emotional guesswork from managing technical personnel. These models function as the technical schematics required to identify and resolve the hidden points of friction within complex human systems.